Alright, welcome to section 2. We're going to start looking at the data, figuring out everything to do with data, which is often the most annoying part of a project, but it's really crucial, and a lot of people forget about it. So this section, if you're already a GIS expert and you're just looking to kind of acquaint yourself with Mapbox's features, some of this section is probably going to just be useless, so you're going to be skipping ahead. I'm just going to be going over a lot of basics that you've probably covered. But if you're relatively new to maps, or you're approaching a few projects and you've just worked a little bit with maps, but it's still a little opaque, then this section might clear up a lot for you. A lot of things about mapping data, geographic coordinates, the different types of files and repositories that exist out there can be really confusing. So this section will be useful widely, as well as within the specific parameters of Mapbox. I'm going to outline a few tips and tricks that you kind of need to manipulate your data properly to use it within Mapbox. And we're also going to look just briefly at Mapbox Classic near the end, so that we can just see where Mapbox has been, and this kind of alternative tool that is out of date and you probably shouldn't use, but it's still useful in certain ways. So we're going to take you through all kinds of things in this section. So to start, we're just going to look at getting ourselves some data. Where do you get data? How do you get good data? Why is it important? A lot of people, when they come to me with projects, they just come kind of with the assumption that the data does exist somewhere and it can be used. Someone might just say, oh, I want all the dentists within 20 miles of where I live. And that data, of course, that does exist. Someone can do research, or maybe there's somewhere on the internet you can find it, but it's also not just ready somewhere in a prepared fashion. You have to actually go retrieve it, and you have to know a few things in order to do that. So for whatever kind of project you're doing, inevitably you're going to have some kind of data. You might have it already formatted a particular way, and if you do, Mapbox will probably be able to accept it. But if it's formatted improperly, Mapbox will tend to reject everything. And so we're going to go over a little bit of how to get standardized data, and also to acquaint yourself with the different types of files that you might run into when you're looking for data. So let's get it in there. So as I've just been saying, Mapbox does require good data. It needs it to be formatted properly, which you can imagine because as a very large platform, they have very strict compliance with kind of the latest standards. So for instance, certain types of files called Geojsons need to have very specific numbers of arrays and the way that coordinates are placed within them, and certain kind of the order of the coordinates is very important, and it can be frustrating for people to try to fix them over and over. Um, but Mapbox does require you to do that. So it's a good way to get your data standardized at the same time that you're kind of acquainting yourself with your own project and what kind of data is out there. So this is just a map of some actually indigenous languages that I just randomly picked up off Google. Um, one of the sites that I made that I mentioned last time is native-land.ca, which does a lot more extensive mapping than this. But this is just an idea of the kind of thing that you might be trying to map out sometime. You might need the data of this area, and you want to draw this map, but you need to find that data somewhere. You need to create it yourself or something like that. So there's a few different ways you can approach it. In this case, this map exists here, but it's not really, there's no geographic coordinates, so you need to find a way to trace it. And I'm not going to go over that too much in this series, but we're going to go over a brief tool that might help with that. But in many cases, there are public data sets. So for instance, when it comes to something like, what are the roads, the coordinates of the roads that are outside your house, or things that the government provides, like demographic information, those kind of things. There's so many data sets out there. It's endless. Twitter has all kinds of APIs available with tweets that you can locate geographically, and so there's all kinds of data sets that you can mess around with. But you need to know how to work with them, what information you need, what kind of formats you're going to have to go from and into, and how you pull out the data. And all of that is really its own huge course, but I'm just going to go briefly through that. We're going to go through these three files: Geojsons, Shapefiles, and KML. And that's just because I found that in front-end mapping, These are the kind that I run into the most often, or that I encounter most often in also working with Mapbox and large data sets. We're also going to look at a little bit how these are formatted, just so you know them when you see them. Or when you see that a dataset provides them, you know that if you get one of these, you can find a way to work with them. All right, so let's head out and take a look at some documentation. All right. So first, let's look at GeoJSONs. I'd say that in front-end mapping, this is most often what you're going to run into, and that's because it's object-based. It's something very, oh, this isn't quite, almost out, there we go. It's something quite familiar to someone who's used JavaScript. It's not just a random file. You can edit coordinates. In this case, the coordinates are a little strange because we're not looking at geography. It's a little different, but this is what a GeoJSON essentially looks like. There are many different sites online where you can look at different GeoJSONs. So there's a few good sites such as Geojson.io, which we're also going to look at more, which is a little bit of a tracing tool. So you can create a GeoJSON, and here you can see this kind of format. So we're going to come back and look more at creating this and all this kind of stuff and how this is useful. But let's just look at the format for now. So we have this type feature collection, and then we have features, and then this is an array, and it has a list of objects in it. And each object is a feature, and then there's a type specified for that feature. So that could be a point, it could be a polygon, it could be a line, which is called a line string. It could also be more complicated stuff we're going to look at more. But just so you see kind of how this is formatted, then you see there's multiple arrays here that you enter coordinates into, and this number of arrays will actually also change depending on the type. So there's some formatting that needs to go on with GeoJSON, but it's also very easy to create online. It's just very built into a lot of front-end mapping, so it's often a form that you end up using, and in case of Mapbox, it's extremely common when you use it in Mapbox GL JS. It is the standard. So you need to get familiar with this kind of format and the idiosyncrasies of it. So we're going to be using this throughout, but just a few things to pay attention to when we're starting is this type being correct and the number of arrays that are in your coordinates, because that changes depending on the type of geometry. Now, one more thing, you can also add all kinds of properties. So that includes, if this particular place had a name, I could say, it's like Northern Europe, something like that, or, Northwestern Europe. And let's just say it is the weather there is cold, because right now it is December, and it's probably cold. So now, this doesn't show up on the map or anything. It's not just built in or something like that. But now in this GeoJSON, we can associate properties with this particular type of geographic feature. And in this case, it is actually shown in a little pop-up here on geojson.io, which is just a great site to get yourself acquainted with GeoJSONs or to make a little data set. And we will go over it more again. Okay, so that's just GeoJSON, so that's nice, and you're going to see that around. So let's look at shapefiles now. So that's the second kind. Now these, we're not actually really going to look at anything because you generally just download these. It's a format with Esri vector data. ArcGIS uses it, and usually more professional mapping that's done not just in the browser but by mapping experts, and that are used actually out in the field by cartographers and kind of modern electronic mapping. Shapefiles are probably one of the nearest equivalents that come on to the computer kind of as a standard sharing format. There's a lot of other ways that you can find data online, but shapefiles, it's a pretty common language that people share this when it comes to geographic information. Now, because they come in zip files usually, and they have like a bunch of files inside them, shapefile, and then there's a SHX, and there's a DBF, and a project file, and all of these are necessary in one way or another, most of the time, to making your shapefile actually show up properly in whatever you're trying to. So let's say Mapbox. In order to upload it properly to Mapbox, you're going to have these different files And sometimes when you look online, you're just going to find one of them. You might just find that, or you might just find this if you're looking for some weird data set and you just happen on it. So it can be frustrating because you feel like you have the file but it's not working. You do need to find the larger file, or you need to find out where these other ones are in order to really make it work. Now with shapefiles, again, we're not going to look at any code or anything. They're just going to be zip files that you're going to find around. But there are ways to transform them into Geojsons or transform them into other types of formats. You can upload them to Mapbox, and we're going to be looking at actually using them. And generally, I would say shapefiles are when you're looking for more kind of official information. So if you're looking for information that is actually cartographic, for instance, I was creating a map that was customized for Amsterdam, and I needed to find all the shape files, all the geographic coordinates of all the buildings in Amsterdam, and there is a shape file on OpenStreetMaps, which we're going to look at, that has that information in it, and then I could upload it into Mapbox and make my custom map out of it. But that kind of information tends to come as shapefiles. It doesn't tend to come as GeoJSONs, although it's probably available in that format. Shapefiles are the quickest to download, quickest to upload. There's lots of detail that can be fitted into them, and they're really good. When you find a shapefile, you're generally finding something that's good quality. The last type of data format that we're going to look at is a KML, and a KML is, geez, I don't even know what it stands for, something strange like keyhole markup language, I believe. Doesn't really matter, just another stupid acronym. But it looks kind of like a XML feed or something like, you know, like this kind of HTML looking code that's vaguely understandable by just looking at it if you've used HTML at all. And this is something I don't find as much anymore, but it was very common in the past few years to find a lot of the data I was using in this format. Again, I don't find it that much anymore, but when you do, you want to know that you can get this out through some of the similar means we're going to look at. And I've also found that this kind of data, when I've encountered it, is often corrupted, so it's good to encounter what it looks like. So there's a little form here, and I downloaded a larger KML just so we could look at it. There's some more here. You can see it specifies it's a KML up here, and then there's a little bit of place mark data, or that might change depending on what exactly is showing. There's a description with some information, and you can actually put HTML right in there. Some coordinates specified, again, within these kind of XML tags. There's a few things you can do. This site at Google is quite handy for formatting these. And just to get you a sense that you can have quite a large file with these, and you can have all kinds of different types of coordinates. So these say linear ring as opposed to a point or just a polygon. You're going to have all kinds of different formats within these. You can see some of these are very large. There's a lot of coordinates here laid out. And you can see there's multiple coordinates. And something that sometimes happens between KML, Geojson, shapefiles is that the latitude and the longitude may sometimes be reversed. You're going to usually run into errors that will get very familiar as you get used to working with them, but just be aware that you often have to flip those in some of the data transformation you're going to be doing. So that's about some of the files that we're going to look at. Now, when it comes to actually uploading data to Mapbox, just since we've talked about these files, it's good for us to just talk about some general information about this so you get familiar with some of the limits and the issues of Mapbox when it comes to uploading. So by uploading, I generally mean when you actually go in and log into Mapbox, and it asks you to upload a data set or a tile set, and you're trying to get your geographic information in there. So you might run into some of these files. You might have a shapefile or a GeoJSON or a KML or some other thing, and you need to upload it. So we're going to go over this in detail and actually do it and go through the process quite a few times. But it's good for you to know about that there are limits you may run into, and we're going to also go over some ways to deal with that, particularly in this section. So for instance, here's a KML. You need to have it be less than 260 megabytes with 15 layers or fewer. So the data set, for instance, that I ran into when I was getting my buildings for a shapefile from OpenStreetMaps was about 280 megabytes. And that was a little frustrating because it was only just over, but I needed to get it down in size. And so we're going to go over that. But that is a problem you may run into if you're really looking and you just find the great data set and that's too big. It's very frustrating. You don't know really what to do. And this says, okay, some of these are for data sets, some of these are for tile sets, and what's going on here. We're going to go over all that. Some of these formats we're not going to look at in great detail, GPX, MB tiles, CSV, but they're all workable. So when you just look at these and kind of get familiar with them, and if you see them online, and when you're looking for data, know that they could be valuable for you when it comes to Mapbox. And one last thing, when it comes to uploading data, some of these, they're too big, but when you actually try to upload them, they recommend that you use the Mapbox API to directly upload data sets here. So this is a little too advanced for what we're really going to go into in this course. We're not going to go in deep into the Mapbox API itself beyond using the Maps API and GL JS. But you should know that there are more advanced management available when it comes to data sets and how you manage your maps within Mapbox. You can actually create your own little site or your own administrative interface to manage some of these or connect it to a database that you have with your project. And you can upload and change data in your data sets accordingly. And I believe in this by creating a single data set, you may be able to upload more features than the 260 megabytes allows by directly sending each of them. So that's an interesting workaround if you really need to get something, if you just have to get that much data and you can't split it up into multiple pieces or anything like that. So in this section, I just wanted to go over some of the issues with data, some of the importance of data, and I'm gonna continually harp on the importance of data because it's just something that everyone overlooks. And if you're even this far into this section, you're already my hero by just paying some attention to data. And in the next section, we are going to go over a little more some of the actual sources you can use for data to find these Geojsons and so on, and what to do when you download them, how to look at them, how to check them out. And I'll see you in the next video.